Good day, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to our Technology and Logistics Fireside Chat. My name is Adam Roark. I'm the Worldwide Transportation and Logistics Industry here at AWS. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. We really are excited about the opportunity to speak with you and share really in a very informal way, kind of what's going on in the logistics industry from a technology perspective. So what I'd like to do at this time is I'd like to have our other panelists introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Manuel Berber from Amazon. Manuel, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead and introduce
Awesome.
yourself, your role.
Hey.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. My name is Manuel. I'm General Manager for Singapore operations at Amazon. So that includes basically fulfillment, transportation, program management, engineering, and procurement. So basically anything that's moving product from an e-commerce point of view for Singapore operations. I've been at Amazon for 9 years, almost. Sorry, can you hear me?
Are you a speaker now?
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so I started off in Germany in 2012, moved to Japan 2015, and I'm working in Singapore since 2019 early on. So really excited to join this discussion. So thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manuel. And next up, I'd like to introduce Raymond. Raymond from Singapore. Can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Adam. Great to be here. My name is Raymond Krishnan. I am currently the president of the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society. We're a Singapore government gazetted society established in 1999, and we've got close to 50,000 members throughout Asia and the Middle East, and some in the US and Europe, obviously. We do a couple of things. We run symposiums globally. Our largest symposium was held just 2 weeks ago, and we had just under about 37,000 participants. And I think that makes us the largest supply chain conference in the world. Obviously, it was done over Zoom and not meeting in person, given it's COVID. We also publish a couple of magazines. One goes out 10 times a year and one goes out 6 times a year. And it's separated towards 2 sides of the industry. One is more research-based and focused, and the other is more mainstream and newsy, if you like. And we do a whole bunch of other things around certifications and qualifications. So we're manned by volunteers, such as myself, and we've got a small team of 6 full-time employees that run the society.
Thank you, Raymond. Appreciate that. Great to have you here. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to turn to Nidhi Gupta. Nidhi, can you please introduce yourself and your role, please?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Adam. So I lead Podcast. We're a startup based in Singapore, but we work with global companies, logistics and manufacturing companies, and we predict how cargo moves across the world by looking at external data sets, disruptions in the industry, and the geolocation of the cargo anywhere in the world. My background personally has been in the logistics space. I worked for a decade for DHL. In various business roles, leadership roles like management consulting, business development and strategy, and have been in Singapore for the last 15 years. Would be glad to share my views on how the logistics industry is kind of at an inflection point right now.
Well, thank you so much. We look forward to your input today because I think you've got some great insights, especially on the topic that we're going to talk about today. So thank you so much. And our last panelist is Rohit. Rohit, are you there? Can you introduce yourself, please? I think Rohit was having some technical difficulties, so if he happens to join, we'll allow him to introduce himself. I don't think he's joined yet.
No,
so what we'd like to, yeah. So what we'd like to do now is ask some questions, and really, it's an informal fireside chat, and really want to get some insights from the panelists. After the first question, we're going to have a question and answer session from the audience. So we look forward to your questions. So what I'd like to do is really start off with our first question today. And really, it's a interesting question because everybody's talking about it, especially in the logistics industry. And that is really what is driving the logistics industry post COVID-19. Now we say post COVID-19, in some places it's not post COVID-19 yet, but getting close. So I'd like to direct this question to Ramon to get his insight on what he believes is driving the logistics industry post the pandemic. Ramon?
Thanks, Adam. I think I would answer this in two parts. The first part would be there's still going to be a continued drive or push with the focus on technology. However, I think we do need to be mindful that different companies are going to be at different stage of progress, different stage of their thinking, of how they actually want to implement technology. So I would almost put it into like 6 segments, if you like. One is where you're based geographically. For example, I would like to think that if you're in Singapore, Hong Kong, or Shanghai or China, you are probably perhaps a bit more advanced in your supply chain thinking than you would be in, say, a developing country, where you're looking at more of the bread and butter issues. And also the size of your geography that you operate in as well. That would also kind of define your thinking. The other thing that we might want to think about when we think about the focus on technology is separating the small enterprise who say 5, 6, 7 employees to the medium enterprise. In Singapore, that's defined as a company that's 200 employees and below. Okay, so sorry, that's 100 employees and below. So if I'm the CEO or if I'm running a small SME, survival is probably the mainstay of what I'm thinking about. But if I'm a larger company, I've got more time, more bandwidth, perhaps, and maybe more experience to actually think about where I want to focus on technology in the supply chain space. And I think the third area is, when we're looking at the focus on technology, is perhaps what exactly you do in supply chain management. If you're an e-commerce company, if you're a startup, my impression is that you're more agile in your thinking, you're more willing to embrace new technology compared to, if you're a shipping line or if you're a traditional 3PL or freight forwarder, you're thinking more around running trucks, running warehouses. So it's a mishmash. So it's not a one size fits all answer of where you focus on technology. I think you actually have to look at the size of the company, where they're located, the maturity of the company, and what exactly they do in the supply chain space. So that's the first part of the question, okay? The answer to your question. I think the second part of the question, when you talk about what's driving the logistics industry post-COVID-19, is that same question that every company asks, right? Staying alive and profitable. What do you want to do? Do you want to stay in that niche space? Or are you going to be a company like what we're seeing now with all the mergers and acquisitions that are taking place? Panalpina being part of DSV, Agility being bought out as well. The stocks of Schenker, for example, being acquired. So how are you going to stay alive and profitable? We're seeing shipping lines, for example, report staggering or really quite good earnings results. Is that going to be the mainstay going forward? Are shippers going to sit around and just accept that? I don't think so. So how's that balance going to shift? So the first part, the focus on technology. The second, staying alive and profitable.
Thank you, Ramon. I absolutely agree with you in terms of some of your comments there. So it is changing a dynamic for sure. I'd like to open it up to the other panelists, to Manuel or Nidhi, and get your thoughts on what do you think is driving the logistics industry post the COVID-19. I'll direct that question to Nidhi first.
Yeah, I think, logistics was always talked about as the critical backbone of global trade, but I believe there was no better time to see this more clearly than in the last year. We've seen how economic changes and how consumption patterns really drive logistics and also have a complete impact on, are we getting our goods on time? We've seen massive capacity constraints, but at the same time, higher e-commerce, sudden surges of cargo like, requirements like PPE or vaccines. So I think what has resulted is that companies realize the importance of logistics as a critical function and a critical lever of getting global trade across the world. And trade is continuing to go, it's going to still stay as global in nature as possible. I mean, of course, we'll see modes of transport or factories of the world moving at different locations, but still we can't, not have global nature of trade. So I think there are three things that I think would change in the industry. One is the use of data to bring more visibility, traceability, and optimization in logistics. Disruptions that we've seen in the industry, be it COVID, be it Suez Canal, Brexit and the related congestion, or the recent Taiwan crane breakdown, these kind of things are going to continue to happen. And it's not a one-time behavior. What is important for companies to do is really understand how these disruptions are impacting their supply chain, and what actions they can take to be proactive about it. So not to be able to predict these events, but once these events happen, be able to respond as fast as possible and be able to think about the impact on this exactly at the right unit level in the supply chain. So, for example, getting the exact view of a package's location and the condition, being able to correlate what the disruption is going to impact it, and then looking at external data sources like weather, traffic, congestion, and using technologies like machine learning and trying to change routes in real time. So that data visibility, traceability, I think is the first thing. The second thing I think is, creativity in multimodal transportation. So we've looked at, repurposed passenger aircraft for cargo, also called freighters now. We can, already see that there's likely to be a boom for rail from China to Europe. So multimodal transport, I think, is really going to be the thing of the future, and in a more creative fashion, being agile about it. And then the third thing I believe is, sustainability and safety protocols. So sustainability has been a good to have sort of, and I think it's going to be more and more strongly linked with bottom line profitability, optimization, and how that drives, fuel consumption or safety protocols, cargo inspection at borders. I think all of that is just going to get strengthened. So I think those are the three things that I think, would be the broad themes in terms of data, multimodal, and in terms of sustainability.
Thank you so much. I think that's spot on in terms of some of the observations. I'm going to come back and give my input as well, but I want to give Manuel a time to kind of talk about what does he believe is driving the logistics industry post-COVID. Manuel?
Thanks so much, Adam. Yeah, I think just to add on what has been said already, maybe a bit of, I think the first point that I would really stress, also what Nidhi just mentioned, is like safety protocols. I think COVID has taught us all that we need to think a bit different about safety, overall, how we operate. I mean, traditionally, safety protocols are more related, to fire safety, accident prevention, or ergonomics, right? I think this kind of reality that there can be a pandemic and there can be outbreaks, I think is something that the entire industry will need to get prepared for if they haven't gotten prepared yet during the pandemic, right? So it's really around how do you make sure that you keep people safe, once the people that are, the employees, obviously, how do we keep partners safe, and how do we keep customers safe, right? So all of the initiatives that the industry has taken in terms of, I mean, specifically in Singapore, like also the temperature screening, safe distancing measures, enhanced cleaning protocols. Like, I think this is something that the industry will need to take into account and will need to be ready for, and switch it on quickly if needed, and maintain it as required based on the situation. Because I mean, honestly, I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately, but I think COVID won't just disappear, right? even though people are vaccinated, is still it can still reoccur. We see there's a couple of waves or repetitive waves in different countries and different strains. So I think it's a reality we just need to get used to, and hence that's why I think like safety protocols and the thinking about safety is paramount. And then how we can be enabled to is not, I mean, obviously most importantly for health and safety of our people, but also from a business continuity standpoint. So I think that's one. The other point is obviously how can we support communities, right? How can we leverage our supply chains to support communities, regions across the world, right? So I think we have seen all the news, right? There are a lot of companies, governments engaged, and especially in the pandemic scenario, it's. I mean, I think the common understanding is that no one is safe until everyone is safe, right? So hence, I think how can we leverage our existing infrastructure, and how can we remodel that quickly? How can we change the focus quickly in order to have these kind of initiatives helping other countries and people in need? I think that's a second point. And then thirdly, is also like from a diversification standpoint. So what Nidhi also mentioned, like multiple modes of transport. And also, is there, can we repurpose facilities for different purposes as needed? Do we go further into multi-sourcing with multiple suppliers just to ensure that if something happens in one region and the other region is able to support that? So I think these are kind of the key questions that the industry will need to focus on, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. I agree with you, and I would love to dive deeper on that one in just a second. I wanted to give Rohit a chance. Has Rohit been able to join us? Rohit, are you there? So apologies, Rohit's having some technical difficulties still. So I would like to go back and oh, he says he's there. Can you speak, Rohit? Can we hear you? I don't think we can hear him. So I would like to go back to the panelists and really kind of ask, because one of the things that I'm seeing with post-COVID in the logistics industry is it's like never before in terms of driving behaviors, patterns. The volumes are up. We used to have peak season. We used to get ready for peak season. Now it seems like peak season is here every day, right? I know the buying habits of customers is really changing the way the logistics industry is dealing with these volumes that we're seeing these days. And so I'd like to just, in terms of what it's doing to the industry, I would like to just kind of throw an additional question out there to just kind of say, do you see different habits, different things staying the course and going forward, going to continue to drive the industry the way it is and has been in the last few months? And really, I just throw this open to anyone in the group that's on the panel to kind of answer that question. Manuel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we have learned that the patterns are changing very quickly, right? And like more quickly than we had anticipated, and more quickly than we thought, and also in different directions. So hence, I think I wouldn't go as far as to say the pattern as is will remain. I think the lesson learned for me is there will always be a lot of unexpected things happening, and we cannot really quantify that necessarily to perfection in advance. So I think the mental model for me is really the trends that we're currently seeing might not be here tomorrow. So I think it's more around getting ready, being flexible and staying nimble to adjustment in these kind of patterns, right? Because I think making like such kind of projection based on the current knowledge, at least I think it's always hard to say, and it always depends. And I think we've seen it in Singapore that the situation can change very quickly. So hence, I think that the one thing that is continuing is definitely this requirement for flexibility and adjusting very, very rapidly, right? And then I think having more an open mind towards how that change may look like. Right? So that's how I think about it.
Can I just add here? So, one of the things we do with companies is really demand forecasting, demand sensing, and by looking at what's happening in the economy, what's happening to consumption patterns in different sectors, and so on. So, the question you asked is, kind of right in that space, and I completely agree with what Manuel said that there's no one constant theme. It's not a flat sort of line about the kind of trends that we will see. Just to give you a few examples, there was a time when there were planes full of fidget spinners that were going to the US, and that was because it was just a fad that customers were buying a lot more fidget spinners, and therefore we saw that kind of demand, and cargo had to be transported from China to carry that cargo. And now we've seen, PPE, or we've seen vaccines. Through when COVID started, we saw a lot of consumption of, garden equipment, kitchen equipment going from Asia to Europe, because people were at home, they were buying more, they were taking care of their gardens more. So they were buying different kinds of products. So there will always be different things that people will consume. And you can't predict that, but you just need to react better to it. You just need to spot those trends from what you're seeing in your data, what you're seeing in the social space and news, and then you need to react to it. And I think that's going to stay. We're going to see different peaks and troughs about demand, different kinds of commodities moving, different kinds of trade lanes becoming important. Latin America, Africa are going to start to be also the factories of the world rather than just Asia. So I think that's going to be a constant theme. It's really about how fast we react to it.
Thank you very much. Ramon, any insight there?
Well, I'm sitting here listening to my panelists, and they're absolutely correct. But I was just thinking about it. I've been doing this for about more than 30 years now. Yeah. So those old enough to remember the Asian economic crisis in the 90s or the 80s, the Asian economic crisis. Then we had the global financial crisis. And of course, now we've got COVID, and that's unprecedented, right? No one's seen anything like this. But, when I first started out in the industry and you were negotiating rates, for example, the largest RFQ I did was for $300 million of spend. And when you approached the 3PL, it was negotiating a 1-year global contract for your ocean freight and air freight across the board. And it was a trend. Either the market went up or the market went down. About 10 years ago, I stopped doing that. Why? Because when you've got one market, say Trans-Pacific eastbound, that is doing very well, that's very aggressive, you've got rates from Asia to Europe that are very low. So you can't actually look at the market as a whole. And when people talk about black swan events, like say the Suez Canal accident, it was an accident. Accidents happen all the time. We've now got that tank, the container ship off the coast of Sri Lanka that's sinking, right? That's about to pollute everything. So firstly, when you talk about trends, the market has always been that way for the last decade or so. It's not like it was 30 years ago. Trends were global. Now they're very market specific, they're sector specific, trade lane specific. And being agile to respond to black swan events or incidents, that's just the nature of the business. If you're a good logistics person or a good supply chain person, dealing with issues on a day-to-day basis as they crop up is what you do for a living anyway. So what's the big deal? And the last thing I would say though, and this may not be a very popular opinion, people have got short memories, okay? So what's going to happen is if we overcome COVID-19, many companies, especially those who live quarter to quarter and look at shareholder return on investment and stock prices, they're going to live quarter to quarter. And what we're going to see is lean supply chains happening again. Because why? You need to ship large quantities, high volumes through your supply chain in order to recognize those economies of scale. How many of us, when you look at Toyota announced recently that they don't see an issue with the chip shortage. Toyota is the mother, if you like, of GIT, but they changed their mindset and their thinking a few years ago with all those disruptions that they were seeing in their supply chain, to say, let's move away from the GIT model and let's stock up on inventory, in this case, chips. But how many automakers are in that same boat? The rest of them are saying that we're going to have to delay earnings, we're not going to be able to meet production demands because we don't have those chip shortages. So people don't actually learn. We can talk aspirationally about, oh, there's more information out there, there's more focus on technology and the importance of it. But I think we also have to remember, people don't learn, right? Supply chains or organizations don't have that commercial fortitude to actually think as supply chains. So that's just being a bit controversial, and I'm sure my panelists will have something to say to that.
Well, thanks, Ramon, for that. I appreciate that insight, and I think you're right in so many ways. So I'm gonna pause again and see. Rohit, you joined us.
Yes,
Great,
I
thank
have
you.
finally made it after all the logistics.
Oh, you're on mute.
Challenges.
Oh, there you are.
Yes, I have made it. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to join you guys. I was actually here, but glad to join as a speaker finally and be able to speak to all of you. Very short and quick intro on myself. I'm part of the investment team at Sequoia Capital, based out of Singapore, and focus on Southeast Asia as a region. We tend to back early stage startups and partner with them across Southeast Asia. I currently work with some of the logistics startups in the region, including trucking startup Cargo, a cross-border logistics startup Janio, and also Shipper in Indonesia. So delighted to be here with all of you, and look forward to this awesome panel.
Well, thank you, Rohit. We're so glad that you were able to join us. We really appreciate having you here. I'm going to give you a chance, since the panelists have already answered one question, and that is, what do you believe is driving the logistics industry post COVID-19?
Yeah, quick thoughts on that. I think one of the things that we as investors in early stage startups see that more and more categories which pre-COVID were not lending themselves very well to online commerce or e-commerce have now started to move online. And as a result of that, you would see that naturally logistics, and especially express logistics or e-commerce logistics, are starting to go into areas which were traditionally not handled by express logistics companies. And this is driving a big surge in parcel volumes. It's driving a big surge in overall logistics infrastructure in all emerging markets. And I think it's a net positive for both the logistics industry, but also for consumers who can get their goods shipped faster and faster at a cheaper cost because of just the sheer scale that these logistics companies are getting to. So yeah, I think that's sort of one big shift which we're seeing, which is new categories that are moving to online commerce.
Okay, thank you so much for I appreciate you sharing that. Please, to the audience, please, if you have any questions you'd like to ask the panelists, please do so in the chat, and we'll get to your questions in just a second. I'm going to move on to our next question while we're waiting maybe for some questions coming from the audience. And really that is, how is technology enabling the logistics industry today? And I'd like to turn to Manuel and ask him that question to give us his insights.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think this kind of like technology enabling logistics per se, I think is not a new theme, right? I think traditionally we've always seen technology helps with efficiency, defect reduction, analysis. So it essentially supports process execution and operational excellence, obviously. Continuous improvement, right? Because it's easier to root cause issues and basically then to find the right countermeasures to make sure that the issues don't reoccur, and also supports decision making, obviously, right? So I think because we have like we get real-time data, we get even if it's not real time, right? We get daily updates. It gives us just more data points to make educated decisions. I think overall, it's a big supporting pillar of the entire industry, and I think it definitely goes beyond logistics. I think what is driving, or what has been driving our operation, or the operation in general for logistics during this pandemic, is again how can we support safety precautions, right? So, for example, technology that we have also deployed is what we call a distance assistant, and I think it's basically showing people in real time, hey, are we staying away from each other, right? Because it's hard to judge if you just use your own judgment to see whether you're keeping a safe distance from each other or not, right? So how can AI can really help with that, to show people, look, you are maintaining a safe distance, or you're getting too close, and basically then showing people, look, we need to adjust our behaviors, right? Because I think everyone who's been through that, I think that was one of the tough adjustments that we had to make during this crisis, right? So being social animals, being really used to gather in groups, work closely with each other, right? And you have simple questions like, okay, how do I show someone something on the laptop without getting too close to that person, right? These are kind of questions that suddenly came up, and I think definitely that technology is a key contributor for us to enable this, and to enable us to keep people safe and maintain safety, even in a pandemic scenario, right? So I think that's something that has emerged, and I think where we've seen that technology is really more than the traditional understanding of just efficiency improvement and decision-making support. And then, I mean, overall, the technology makes life simpler, right, for us and for our teams on the ground, right? It makes process simpler. It allows people to focus on higher judgment tasks, right? And we can automate other tasks. So automation is also a big piece of that. So I think overall, in a nutshell, it's really about making life easier for operators and for operational execution, right? And that's why I see there's a harmony between technology and work that has been done traditionally by us, right? So hence, I think that's the key enabling function that technology has for the logistics industry.
Thank you, Manuel. And Nidhi, do you have any comments around that one?
Yeah, I mean, I completely sort of, the key word here is enable. So I really believe technology is enabling the logistics industry. It's not about, sort of not having the power of human expertise. Toyota calls this principle as automation, not automation, but automation, which is automation with the human touch. And basically what they talk about is that 80 to 90% of the whole system, the workflow, has to be automated. And then there's, that agility comes from that 10 to 20% opportunity for human expertise to sort of allow to improve that operation. And I really believe that goes hand in hand then. The human expertise and the deep domain expertise doesn't go away, but it's enabled through technology. And I see sort of two shifts in terms of how technology is going to change. One is technology which is going to be ever prevalent, things like cloud computing, things like IoT and sensors, and things like data and analytics, prescriptive analytics, anything using data more efficiently. I think those are the themes that are going to be sort of a must-have. And then there are the longer-term themes around drones, robotics, autonomous vehicles, which will really bring that that step change in logistics. So I think these are sort of the two main areas of how technology will see logistics being transformed or more optimized.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Great insights. Rohit, any thoughts on how the technology is enabling the industry today?
Points, and I think whether it be the sensors or the drones or the smartphones that people carry around these days, I think at the core of all this is that we're generating so much data at every touch point, whether it be in the warehouses, whether it be when a parcel is moving out from the warehouse all the way to the customer's doorstep, that, a billion data points or more generated from the pace at which the parcel is moving to where it is stopping and so on and so forth. And when you take all of that data back in and analyze it, it gives you a lot of insights on how to plan the next trip and the next trip and the next trip better. And what that does is actually it allows you to make a lot of predictive decisions based on, how to place your inventory and how to organize your workforce so that you can do things which a few years back would have been almost unimaginable. And these are things like when, let's say, you have a single stay in China and you're shipping a billion parcels on a single day. How do you deliver those? And I think you cannot just deliver those by having better infrastructure. You also got to have better intelligence, which is a result of all this data which is generated from the consumer side, from all the smartphones that people are carrying and where are they placing their orders, to all the infrastructure that is now moved to the cloud and allows for all of this data to be tracked in real time. And it's having some amazing real life consequences in the sense that today it's almost possible to ship a $10 item across borders and do it profitably, and drop ship such items across borders and so on and so forth. And a lot of that goes back not just to reducing cost of actually moving goods, but actually the placement of goods in the supply chain, which is more intelligently designed based on this data, which until a few years back was possibly not available.
Great, thank you. Ramon, any insights on this question?
Well, I think what Nidhi said, you've got the technology as the enabler, and you would be silly if you were a supply chain or a logistics person not to look at technology to help enable or expedite or improve how you actually do your supply chain. There's this stuff like cloud computing that she said, which is here to stay. It's fairly fundamental or basic, yeah? But you've also got the step change technologies that will actually is a game changer for how you operate. I think what we need to be mindful though, how many of us can remember when RFID first started gaining prominence about a decade ago? Everyone was saying barcodes are not going to exist. Everyone's going to replace this with RFID technology. We saw a bit of that happening when people started talking about 3D printing. Now, I'm not saying RFID technology is bad or useless. Yeah, it has its place, but it wasn't that step change that everyone expected it to be. There was a lot of hype, a lot of noise, but then look, how many of us actually use RFIDs in our logistics operations? The other thing that we maybe need to be mindful of is that with these new technologies enabling our supply chains, I think there's going to be this larger separations between the haves and the have-nots. I worked with two companies last year, one a multi-billion-dollar Japanese company and the other a multi-billion-dollar American company. Neither one of them had barcode scanning in their warehouse. Neither one of them had a WMS in place. And we had to actually have a business case put together to convince management, the leadership. And you're talking about one $5 billion US company, and the other one's a $9 billion company. But you have to put a business case together to present to their management, to explain to them why you need barcodes and why you need a WMS in their warehouses globally. So yes, there's going to be those guys at the head of the pack, embracing technology, adopting it, implementing it, using it, taking advantage of it. But we also need to be aware that there are these, and a $5 billion company to me is not an SME, these dinosaurs who actually need to be taught on the need to actually have these sort of enabling technologies.
Thank you very much for that. I really do understand where you're coming from on that one. That is so true. We do have a question from the audience, and I'd like to direct this question to first to Rohit. Is there an underserved space in transport and logistics which is primed for early stage startups to make an impact?
Yeah, I think we often say that logistics is an industry which is like digital payments, or one of those industries like which doesn't have a TAM problem. I mean, it just keeps reinventing and keeps expanding itself, and therefore you have to look at what are the new areas where commerce is moving, and all of those areas will need a new logistics partners. I mean, like, just pick examples from the last decade. I mean, 10 years back, food delivery wasn't anywhere as prevalent as it is today. And today, I mean, you have millions of deliveries per day in countries like Indonesia, and all of that is enabled by logistics companies, or whether it be sort of the need for point-to-point transportation or point-to-point courier services and so on and so forth. So I think even today, if you look at markets like Indonesia, Thailand, where so much of the commerce is actually not getting transacted on organized marketplaces, it's being transacted on WhatsApp, it's being transacted on Instagram, on Facebook, and so on and so forth. And these sellers are relatively underserved with respect to the end-to-end logistics experience, which an Amazon or a Shopee or any of the big platforms can provide. And what can a startup do to bring these sellers at par almost with the best-in-class logistics experience that the marketplaces or the big platforms provide? And I think that is just maybe one example, but today there's a lot of momentum around B2B commerce, and how can you enable brands to more efficiently distribute their goods to small retailers, and make just-in-time procurement with the use of technology more seamless and affordable for these small for these small stores in Indonesia and in rural areas in Vietnam, and so on and so forth. And all of these things will need a different logistics design compared to what the e-commerce guys that are serving the consumers have set themselves up for. And these are also not areas which are traditionally well understood by the incumbents of the large logistics companies, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of retooling and redesigning that will go into building supply chains for new e-commerce use cases. And I think we're very excited about entrepreneurs taking a fresh look at these use cases and saying, hey, this doesn't seem like it's served well, and we want to go in and fix it. And we're seeing a lot of that already happen in the earlier stages. I mean, like, we meet a lot of logistics startups that are going after these new and upcoming e-commerce or logistics areas that are relatively underserved.
Thanks, Rohit. Appreciate that. Any panelists, any other comments around that question about an underserved space in transport and logistics today?
Well, if I could be allowed, Adam.
Please.
Two things here. One is, I've looked at a lot of startups that are considered successful. And one observation I have is that your idea is almost irrelevant. It's actually who you have on your board and who you get interested in what you're doing at the early stages is more important than actually having a good idea. Look at Flexport, for example. They are a company that's, that gets a lot of flack. What they do isn't really that exciting, and I think their adoption or them actually being a game changer in the industry isn't that great. what I think is an underserved area, I think the question that was asked is finding a platform or being able to actually connect or integrate all the SME 3PLs that exist out there. Many people talk about it, many people touch the surface, but most solutions out there, or all of them, if I dare say, actually look at trying to integrate the shippers, which is not wrong, yeah, because they dictate what actually moves in the supply chain. But if you think about it, all those SME 3PLs, the guys who have turnovers of, say, around the 100 million to 200 million space. But as soon as a shipment moves internationally, they lose control of it because all these 3PLs are not connected globally on a single platform. And you can be anything from track and trace, exchanging documents, managing payments. And then do you want to look at if you're able to do that or integrate enough of them, or attacking a freight network and getting them on board, you'd want to look at then aggregated buying, whether it's buying shipping space, or whether it's going to be around buying technology, like say a WMS or a TMS or a FMS or freight management solution. So if there's an underserved area, I would say it is a company or a platform or a technology going out there that's able to actually integrate a lot of the SME, the local heroes in a lot of the developing countries or globally.
Yeah, I know that when I speak with customers, that is always a topic. The two topics that come up the most: data, how to use data to gain different insights, and then the second one is integration. And how do I connect the various systems, not within my enterprise, but up and down that supply chain? So that's a very good insight. Nidhi, any comments that you had, Nidhi, from that perspective around what areas are underserved?
Yeah, I mean, having worked in a large logistics company for a decade, I think logistics is still technologically, or overall as an industry, has a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of things that can fundamentally be changed by just learning what other companies are doing, other industries are doing, and what technology has the ability to do. So I think ultimately, if the opportunity of a startup comes by just asking the right questions about, is the task or the process that is currently happening, does it need to continue being that way, or can you change that? Is this a manual, recurring, redundant thing that you're spending time on, which is better done in an automated fashion? Is there an opportunity to bring multiple players on board and create sort of network effects and sort of build that platform play? Just asking the right question. So I think it all it takes is someone to think a little bit differently, to look at a process from kind of a third person's perspective and say, does it need to happen in the same way if it is manual, frustrating, time consuming, but relatively easy for technology to take over? And that's the white space. So it's just about finding those opportunities, and logistics as an industry has still tons of those to offer.
Thank you, Nidhi. Appreciate that. Manuel, anything to add there?
Nothing major. I think most of it has been said, but I think just also what Nidhi mentioned, to identify the white space, just important to stay close to the ground, stay close to the customers, stay close to potential customers, and really understand the on the ground reality, right? And I think that's something that's just always important. Be connected to people, see what pain points they have, and I think that's where you then get a sense of opportunity and things that we can figure out, right? So I think while big data is important, and while quantitative data is important decision-making factor, we should also not lose sight of qualitative data that we get from people directly, right? So just get a view of what are the pain points, and then anticipate and innovate on behalf of these people, right? So I think that's just the general approach that I'm thinking is is the one that gives us a lot of good insights on which areas to focus on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And look, please, if there's more questions, please put them in the chat there. We've got the panelists ready to answer your questions, so we really do appreciate that. We'd like to take a short break, and Nadia or PE, I think you're going to put up a poll question for the audience to answer. So if you could put that poll question up while we're taking a short break, and then we'll come back in a few minutes, in 5 minutes. So Nadia, do you have the poll question, please? So please take a minute, look at the question. What are some of the topics you would be interested in for a post-fire chat after this event? And there's 4 choices there, so please select one, and then we'll be back in approximately 5 minutes. So I think we'll come back now. So if you could remove the the poll from the screen, please. And once again, thanks for everyone for coming back. Once again, please, if you've got questions for the panelists, please put it in the chat, and we'll be happy to share that with the group and get some discussion going. I do have one more question while we're waiting for maybe some questions coming from the audience. And what are some of the lessons learned for logistics startup companies in their stages of growth? And so, Nidhi, if you would take a stab at this one from your perspective, if you don't mind.
Yeah, where should I get started? But I think obviously, you know, as you're building a company, it's a roller coaster, and there's tons of things that are lessons learned. I think the first thing is just what I've realized is just to have the focus on the problem and go deeper into it. And what I mean by that is, of course, you start and build a company based on a problem statement, and you've validated it, and you've talked to customers, and you've sort of, you know, sold the first product only when the customer is on board and all of that. But I think it's a process which doesn't stop. You constantly have to go deeper into the problem, figure out what's the workflow, how is the customer using it, which feature are they using it. Maybe what you think the product is being used for is very different from why the customer is using it. So I think just keeping an eye on the problem and going deeper on it is the first thing that I would suggest, and I've learned. The second thing is, you know, sort of related to that, just being agile, just being customer centric, getting feedback from customers. And I sort of read somewhere about Jeff Bezos, and he talks about leaving an empty chair in the room and saying that the customer is sitting on that chair. And, you know, what's the customer really thinking about this plan or this, you know, sort of action that we have? And that's kind of what I think about, and I talk about as well, because it's about that constant, you know, recurring theme of why are we building this? And is the customer really going to use this? And constantly, you know, having quality for every single time the customer is using the product, they see that quality. And it especially becomes important because we work with enterprise customers, and, you know, to get the foot in the door is already quite hard. So you want to stay and you want to stick with them, and you want to deliver that quality every single time. So that agility and the customer centricity, I think, is the second thing. The third thing I would say is, you know, network effects. And I think network effects comes in every single part of building a company. It could be about hiring people. So the people you already have on board, using that as the network to bring on more people on board. Fundraising, so the investors you already have on board, or the network effects you create around that, you know, how you get new investors come on board through that, starting that early before you're kind of fundraising. And then also product building. So making sure that what you're building starts to bring that network effects, be it in terms of data sets, be in terms of other players who use that same data set or same features and so on. So I think that makes the product and the startup stronger if you start seeing those network effects. And then the last thing I would say is really culture. And a lot of early stage startups, you know, we don't have time to think about culture in the beginning. But I think, you know, as the team gets to, over 10 people, over 20 people, that becomes super important. And today in, you know, the remote way of working, it's ever so important. It's a completely different dynamic, how you can get employee engagement and communication and transparency by building the right steps and cultural practices. So I truly believe in hiring that A team who kind of don't work on a job description, but build their own job description, kind of, you know, define what they want to do and how they want to bring the company to the next level. So, you know, in small early stage companies, every single person who comes in changes the dynamic and the culture of the company. But I think it's still very important to keep an eye on what are those 2 or 3 core principles, and making sure that every single person we hire fits that criteria. So yeah, these are just some of my takeaways from, you know, a few years of building a company.
That's some great insight. I really appreciate that. So Rohit, any insight that you have from lessons learned?
I think one of the one of the takeaways, at least for me, from working with a few logistics startups in the early part of the journey has been that look, for things like logistics, there's not like a question of product market fit, which a lot of companies have to ask in their early days. I mean, like, you're building a logistics service, you go and offer it to someone who's shipping goods. I mean, like, there's a good likelihood if your service doesn't break down and you price competitive, like, you'll get some business. So it's not like building a new app for which you don't know whether there's a use case that exists or doesn't exist, and so on and so forth. And as a result, I mean, tech or no tech, there are thousands of logistics companies just across Southeast Asia, right? At some small scale, some at a larger scale, and some sort of pan Southeast Asia. So for us, it's been about that product insight, which makes this solution better than many of the solutions that have come before it, or that solves the problem in a fundamentally new way, or that changes the economics of the parcels from point A to point B, and so on and so forth. So I think that's been one thing. The other is that logistics, for good or for bad, is all about scale. I mean, like, you could start a small startup trying to serve sellers and buyers in your neighborhood, and it could work with very nice economics, and you could basically have a very good economic model around it, and so on and so forth. And then you expand it to your city, and some of those assumptions go for a toss. And as you take it across a country, whether it be as big as India, or as fragmented as Indonesia, all your assumptions go for a toss, and you have to basically often go back to the drawing board and re-engineer your solution in a way that it works at that scale. So I think for us, from a early stage perspective, we've been working with founders to focus on those two things. One is the scalability of the solution, and second is in some ways it's a lot more about doing it better than about, like, I'm the first to do it, and so on and so forth. Because in logistics, there is not a winner take all market, and irrespective of how good the solution is, the companies would always want to have a diversified approach to managing their logistics vendors, right? Like, you might be the best solution out there, but company, whether it be a big e-commerce platform or a big FMCG company, they're not gonna make you the sole vendor for all their logistics needs, right? So you have to be better than everybody else, and that's how you could possibly get to the largest share within these big, massive, chunky accounts. Yeah.
Thanks, Rohit. Thank you, Rohit. Really appreciate that. Manuel, you have any lessons learned through your experiences that you could talk about?
I think the angle I can put in from a stages of growth is, like, really, even within a big organization, or as the organization grows, how do you stay nimble? How do you stay flexible? I think the important thing is really, like, I mean, what we call at Amazon the day one culture, right? To make sure that we keep focusing on the customers, we stay flexible, we keep the organization flat, we think long term, right? So I think these are I think some perspectives that I can bring in, right? Because as organizations grow, usually the overhead tends to grow with it, right? And sometimes people get caught up in internal debates, I don't know, power struggles. You have excessive approval chains. You ask for permission too often and don't ask for forgiveness later. So I think, like, as you grow, I think it's really important to keep this kind of to remind yourself, like, what it was in the beginning, right? And always keep that focus there, and make sure that it doesn't just go into this big kind of corporation mindset where people then work to their advantages, or just get caught up with internal debates, and then egos come into play. It's really about sticking to the fundamentals, and it's sometimes it's not easy, obviously, right? Sometimes it's tough for people because there are a lot of things to do, a lot of things going on, but that's why it's always important to keep sending the message, keep reminding ourselves, and keep reminding our teams that's what we need to do in order to continue to innovate, right? So I think that's I think one perspective that is always important, especially as you have companies that are growing very rapidly, right? So I think that's the one thing that's always prevalent in my mind. Also, when I work with my team, how do you stay nimble? How do you stay flexible? And it's really about obsessing over customers, understanding what a customer needs, and thinking on the long term, right? Rather than to just firefight all the time.
Thank you very much. Ramon, anything that you would like to add?
Well, I think the previous panelists raised all really good points. And I think it's been said already, be nimble and prepared to pivot. I'm involved in a startup that started in 2019. In 2020, the bottom fell out of their market with COVID. But I was quite impressed that they were nimble enough. They had their eye on the ball and were able to pivot, and I think they're doing great now. So that's one point. The other thing is hit hard and fast and get buy-in early. A lot of guys, that runway that you have to actually make an impact, especially as a startup nowadays, is shorter than it used to be. So hit hard, fast, and get buy-in early. And lastly, I think we saw on about WeWork this morning. Yeah, don't base the growth of your company on continued investment. I think who was it? SoftBank said today it was a bad investment investing in WeWork. But it's something I see a lot of startups. I'm not sure why they do this, but they come up with an idea and they say yes, the trajectory to growth and cashing out is to actually continue getting investment from investors. Not about profitability and not about buying low and selling high, but just keep getting people to invest in their dream and then cashing out.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that insight as well, because I think it's very true, right? So look, are there any more questions, please raise your questions to the panelists and we'll be happy to have a discussion around the question, please. So I don't think we have any more questions coming in. I would like to ask the panelists if there's anything else they would like to share with the audience, maybe relative to supply chain, logistics, and data. I know we could end early if we wanted to, but I'd give everybody a chance if they've got one more comment to make around the use of data in this area of supply chain and logistics. So Nidhi, I'll throw that question to you because I believe you raised it earlier.
Yeah, I mean, at Podcast, data is at the core of what we do. So we use external data sets about, geospatial data about where ships are, where planes are. We look at weather patterns, look at the actual routes of the ships, what the shipping companies are telling us, what ports are telling us, and any economic risks. So it could be Brexit-related patterns, it could be Suez Canal-related congestion, or specific holidays or events, economic indices. And then we consolidate all of that, make data speak the same language, and combine it with internal data sets that customers have to provide insights. Insights like, how do you change your capacity? How do you change your pricing? How do you change your routes? And how do you plan your supply chain well in advance? So I really think data is at the core of to build an efficient and scalable manufacturing company or logistics company. And every single second we're seeing millions of data points being developed as we speak. And it's really about how do we make sense of it? How do we bring it, like I said, in the right manner? Update it, understand it in the same language, and then how do we quantify the impact of that data on the real problem statement that we have? Yeah, so data is going to continue being the primary unit of investigation.
Well, it's interesting, Nidhi, because as you were talking, a question came in talking specifically about data and how do you use data and insights to improve the supply chain processes. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, a couple of examples maybe. So for an airline, for example, you know, we've seen more vaccines being transported. We've seen passenger airlines capacity going down. But at the same time, some of the passenger airlines being converted into freighters. All of that has an impact in terms of the demand of air cargo and the supply of air cargo and how that impacts the pricing, the rates of air freight. That's something that data can help us do better. Another example, if there's congestion at UK ports due to Brexit, which we saw in January this year, data can tell us how many ships are waiting around the ports, how long they've been waiting, what are the other ships that are going to come in, how many trucks have been waiting, what's the capacity of that particular port. And looking at all of that, a specific container, is that going to be delayed or not, and by how much time, and why is that going to be delayed? So again, data can allow us to do all of that. And what it brings impact on is that a manufacturer, a toys company or a furniture company waiting for that cargo can plan their supply chain better. Do you need to get the truck in time at the port? Do you need to plan the warehousing? Do you need to work with the customs authorities and get that cargo right in time? So, you know, the whole principle of just-in-time supply chains really rests on data being right. It becomes super interesting or important for specific industries like automotive. An auto manufacturer and assembly plant can actually stop if a single container did not arrive, because that carried the, you know, the wheels of the motorcycle that they were assembling. So yeah, that's all where data really becomes important.
Rohit, do you have any insights on how supply chain using data is changing the supply chain processes?
Of overarching, you know, if I have to sort of make one parting comment to the panelists on the on this webinar today, I think one thing that we have to keep in mind is that logistics industry in Southeast Asia specifically is still in its early innings. I mean, if you look at markets like China, I mean, like, those markets have grown to almost 200, 250 million deliveries per day. And by comparison, Southeast Asia, which is a population of, you know, almost 500 to 600 million, we're still at a fleet 8 to 10 million parcels a day. And what that means is that at least we expect that over the next decade or so, this will grow maybe 4 or 5x, at least in Southeast Asia, and you would have maybe 50, 60 million parcels just for e-commerce deliveries per day in Southeast Asia. And, you know, that may be just the front end, but behind that, whenever, you know, there is a e-commerce parcel being delivered, there are goods that are moving from first the manufacturing hubs to the distribution points, or distribution points into the cities, so on and so forth. So that entire supply chain is going to be more digitized, is going to be more data oriented. People would want to make decisions on where to store their goods and when to pick it up and where to ship it, etc., all based on data and algorithms versus manual planning. And I think to operate at that scale and to operate at that efficiency, which makes that scale viable, it's all going to go back to making better and better decisions on data and the ability of the softwares that you know, people are building to meaningfully draw insights from that data.
Thank you very much. There's a question here, and Nidhi, I'm going to share this with you because you actually talked about it earlier in terms with the recent Suez Canal blockage taking the world by storm. Any thoughts from the panelists on what learnings can be taken from the Suez Canal event? And I believe you probably spoke about the data and having the insights. Anything that you could share relative to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So two things. One is, such disruptions are going to continue to happen. There is Suez Canal that happened at that point of time. There's the Taiwan crane breakdown right now. Raymond talked about the Sri Lankan incident of the ship and oil spill. So there's always going to be disruptions, different types of disruptions. We just need to be ready for it, to prepare better for it. So what can one do about it? And that's where data comes in. So what was happening around Suez Canal was, while that was congested, there were three options that cargo could take. One, ships were actually waiting for the clearing to be done because they were too far near the canal, and to turn back would be too costly or too time consuming, and they just waited for that congestion to be cleared. The second was, there were ships that could actually detour all around South Africa and go back to Asia, or take a different route, to Europe. And that was the second option that ships could take. The third was to use multimodal transport. So drop off, cargo at a different location than planned, and then use multimodal transport to actually get it to the destination. And all of this, while it caused delays, manufacturers did not know what was going to happen to their particular cargo unit. And that's where data comes in, to be able to pinpoint which cargo is on which ship, what's that route that the ship is going to take, is it going to stay there, wait for congestion to be cleared, is it going to go around South Africa, is the cargo going to be dropped off in some other port, is the ship going to be changed, or is that cargo on Ever Given and it's still going to be stuck? All of this basically is something that data can help put together, and then tell that manufacturer, hey, out of the 100 sort of containers that you're waiting for, this is the likely state of it, and this is the delay, quantify it, and this is why we believe that this delay is. And that then allows them to plan, okay, what should I do? We still need to sell toys, we still need to sell perfumes. What should we do about this? And should we air freight that cargo? Should we get it from different distribution centers? Should we tell our customers that we're going to have to wait? So that then allows them to plan better, because they now understand what happened to that cargo. So that's exactly what we try to help companies with in terms of contingency alerts around the canal.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that insight. So one last question here, and Rohit, I'm going to aim this question to you, because you're working with a lot of startup companies in the logistics industry. The question really is around, with Uber, Grab, Gojek, and others pioneered in on-demand point-to-point logistics, what do you see as the next iteration evolution in consumer logistics? That's a pretty loaded question. That one we could talk about for some time, I think.
Always believe that it's the founders that frame the next solutions, and then we somehow magically all believe that the word has caught on to it. So I think I'm almost as clueless as anybody else on which is the next revolution at scale in consumer logistics. But we do get to see a lot of examples of what companies around the world are doing and how are they innovating. And there are a few pointers on where this can go. One of the very exciting models that again, I'll again sort of refer to China. That is where a lot of innovation within logistics is happening, just because the depth at which e-commerce penetration is growing there is phenomenal, right? Like we're seeing new models of e-commerce that are enabled by a very different types of logistics. And these are group buy models, for example, where instead of dropping off 10 parcels to 10 people within the same community or the same condominium, you basically drop off to one person's doorstep, and then everybody basically gets their parcels picked up from this person. And that basically provides for a much cheaper cost and allows companies to deliver goods that, for example, it's like fresh groceries. I mean, like, it was maybe not feasible to deliver $2, $3, $4 orders picked up from a store to a person's doorstep. But when you pool all these orders, and deliver it to one person, it becomes a $30-40 order. And now if you drop it at one person, and whether it be instant, whether it be 30 minutes, 4 hours or whatever, suddenly the economics start to work and the business model becomes viable. So we're seeing some very interesting experiments around these things. And I think that's where probably the version 2.0 for consumer logistics might head. And that's just one part. I mean, we're also seeing that same aggregation of demand on the seller front, like in markets like India or US. If you're a small seller, you still get sort of the first mile pickups done from your doorstep by logistics companies, and that adds cost, and that makes certain products viable and certain products not viable. But in markets, even in Indonesia, there are aggregators that are coming up, that are setting up shops in every neighborhood where, within a 200-300 meter range, 5 minutes from your door, you could find a small kiosk where you could drop off all the parcels that you have to ship for that day, and all logistics companies can possibly pick it up from there. Again, bringing down the cost of deliveries within consumer logistics. And I think all of this goes back to making supply chains more efficient, faster, and more importantly, making new type of consumer goods viable on the online supply chain, which, because of this sort of included cost of first mile, the long haul and last mile, is sometimes not viable. And all the innovation that is happening is, I think the long haul is relatively well optimized, or there's a lot of innovation happening in that space as well. But I think the first mile and last mile are still up for big time disruption, because this one-to-one mapping of one parcel, one delivery person at a time, I mean, this model is going to get challenged over the next decade or so.
I agree. Absolutely. Ramon, any insights on that from your perspective? You deal with a lot of different companies. Any insights on your end?
I think what's interesting to see is how the likes of the JD.coms and the Chineaos are actually tackling this question around shipping profitably or low cost end to end in your supply chain. Unfortunately, and many seem to have forgotten this, but they're starting to realize it again, is that it's all about volume. There's no way you can ship effectively and efficiently with low volume. So that's the aggregators who are going to come into play. And what these companies are doing is quite interesting. And I think that's going to be the next step change or evolution in consumer logistics that we're going to see. So I would watch this space and maybe learn, see what they're doing, and where possible, even try and emulate some of this.
Okay, thank you. We do have one last question, and I honestly don't know which panelist to ask this question to. So I'm going to throw the question out there, and if we have any experts in this space, please chime in here. What is your take on a tech startup doing cybersecurity instead of dealing with data? With regards to the recent attack on Elon Musk by Anonymous, what do you think should be done by the tech industry? And literally, I don't know who to ask that question of, so I'm going to put it out there and see if any of the panelists wants to respond in any way.
About Twitter, so we can't read this again. No, but frankly, no. I don't have very much to add this.
I don't have anything to add on that question either. So sorry about that. Well, look, I want to take a moment and thank our panelists for their time today. We really do appreciate your time, your insights. I think we've got it from all different perspectives here in the panelists. We really appreciate those that attended today. Thank you for your questions. We will get back to you with regard to the poll question that was asked, but we really do appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. And if there's anything that you need, please reach out to us, to the organizers of the event. and we'd love to get in touch with you and have further discussions. So thanks everyone for your time today and have a great day.